I'm Rich Novack. You might recognize me from videos like You May Be Right, I May Be Crazy, but it just may be a poem you're looking for. Or Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Time to Write. Today, I want to talk to you about Write Out found poetry. Let's get going. What is found poetry? Good question. Found poetry involves stitching old texts together, weaving them together into new poetic texts. Where do we find texts to use for found poetry? Well, we could find them anywhere, but today we're going to talk about how we might use parks near you to find some language that we could stitch together into found poetry. In this video, we're going to talk about two types of found poetry. The classic found poetry, which looks like clippings from a newspaper or copying and pasting from some text onto a blank sheet, like in this picture, whereby we create a poem from the text of some other source texts. The second type of found poetry I want to talk about is what I'm calling found on the trail poetry. Found on the trail poetry involves us writing about what we find outdoors and then stitching those texts into a new poem. Classic found poetry involves identifying texts in which to find language for poems. In the text, locate words and phrases that are filled with poetic inspiration. Then fashion a poem from the language found in various texts. So where do we find source text for our found poems? Well, very often in parks around the country, there's kiosks or bulletin boards that give information about the park, maybe give some history, maybe give some warnings, maybe post some rules, but there's fantastic sources of language that we could use for our poems. Take a look. Conservation groups do great work adding text to the book of nature we find in the woods. Trail maps use the language of direction and movement, and sometimes there's cheeky language that people have used to describe the land, and it just offers another wonderful place to bring language to our found poems. Brochures, especially from the national parks, offer well-written prose and stories that we can bring to our found poetry. Usually an open space has a website, and websites are another great source from which we can take language and stitch it together in our new found poems. The woods is filled with language, not just human language, but the more than human language. There's lots of sounds out there that we could bring to our poetry, certainly the tweets and the chickadees of the woods. Bring them to your poem. Found on the trail poetry is my version of a found poem. You know, I think good teachers don't just take an idea and do it exactly as it's written somewhere. Good teachers bring their creativity, they bring their passions, they innovate the idea, they bring it to the curriculum, and then they run with it. All puns intended. So a found on the trail poem could be really effective if you combine it with field journaling, or what today I'm calling outdoor rambling. I'm going to put a URL here in the presentation that'll take you to an earlier video I made about how to do some field journaling. In our field journals, we could find a reservoir of ideas and language with which we can borrow and turn into found poetry. When we bring students to the woods again and again, we find different things every single time. After a rainstorm, you'll find mushrooms. After snowstorms, you'll find snow and all sorts of changes to our environment. My found poem was inspired by a hike I took with my daughter to one of my favorite places on earth, Sleeping Giant State Park in Hamden, Connecticut. The language comes from the brochure trail map that we found there on the trail and a sign that we found in the woods noting a historic place. Oxen Road was carved out. All trails in the park are rough, rocky, and uneven. Hard, steep climbs, interesting geologic features, unmarked historic trails. Fall asleep in eternal repose, lying on his back, feet facing the east, head to the west. Giant news. Purchased the giant's head many years of land acquisition. If you notice any problems in the park, dogs must be leashed. Continuing to conserve the land, entrance for picking. Hubbamuck, crafted by the Quinnipiac, who already inhabited the land when the English colonists arrived. We can't flourish without you. I hope you found some inspiration in this video to write your own found poetry outdoors. I also hope you'll join us for Writeout this year. Go to www.writeout.nwp.org. Join our Facebook group for Writeout. Teachers, you can sign up at the Teacher Studio for more news and places to post your found poetry as well. And also use the hashtag writeout on Instagram when you share with us your found poetry. Right on, everybody.